So, you got a movie for me?
Yes, sir, I do. It's called DellaMorte Dellamore.
Oh, that's an interesting title. What is that, Spanish?
No, sir, it's actually Italian. It roughly translates to of love and of death.
Oh, okay. I mean, it seems like that might lower our profits a little bit. You know how audiences hate to read subtitles.
Oh, you don't have to worry about that, sir. The whole film's going to be in English.
Wait, what?
Yeah, every character is going to speak English.
Well, what's the point of the Italian title, then?
Well, sir, the movie's going to take place in Italy, you see.
Oh, so are we just going to hire American actors and have them do Italian accents, or...?
No, sir. Everyone in this movie has to be played by a European actor, I decided.
Oh, I am very lost, but I'm interested. Tell me what happens in this movie.
Well, we're going to follow this guy named Francesco, and he's the caretaker at this local cemetery.
Oh, okay. So does he, like, bury bodies, maybe clean some tombstones now and then?
Oh, yeah, he does that. When he's not murdering zombies!
Oh my god!
Yeah, so at this cemetery, certain people come back to life after about 7 days, so Francesco has to protect the townsfolk by, bashing these zombies in the fricking head.
Oh, that's interesting. So what decides who comes back to life and who doesn't?
I don't know.
And why is it specifically 7 days?
Listen, sir, the rules of this world are really vaguely defined, and sometimes we're not even going to stick to the whole 7 days thing, so I'm just going to need you to get all the way off my back about this.
Oh, okay, let me get off of that thing for you.
Thanks.
So I bet the people of the town are just super appreciative of all the work this Francesco guy does.
No, not at all.
Oh, really?
Yeah, not a lot of the people actually know that the zombies exist, and the ones that do don't seem to care that much.
Well, they must at least sympathize with the fact that he's doing this all alone.
Oh, he's not alone.
Oh, he's not?
Oh no, he has this mentally disabled friend named Nagi who only says one word and later on falls in love with the disembodied head of a teenage girl.
I have absolutely no problem with portraying that whatsoever. It is 1994.
It is 1994, sir.
So are there any other love stories in this movie I should know about?
Yes, there is. So early on in the movie, Francesco meets this unnamed girl whose rich elderly husband just died, so he just falls in love with her immediately.
Of course.
So later on, he seduces her by showing her a mausoleum full of human skeletons.
Women do like dead things.
They sure do, sir. So then she and Francesco have sex on top of her deceased husband's grave.
Oh, having sex on top of your deceased husband's grave is tight.
So then her dead husband comes back to life and just bites the living crap out of her.
Because people rise from the dead sometimes?
Because people rise from the dead sometimes, that's right.
Wow.
So Francesco, he has to shoot her, but he doesn't aim for the head, so she comes back as a zombie later.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but he doesn't really have the heart to kill her again, so Nagi has to do it.
Well, if he really loved this woman, it's gotta be pretty difficult for him to get over her, isn't it?
Actually, it's gotta be super easy. Barely an inconvenience.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so Francesco, you see, he has a conversation with the Grim Reaper.
What?
Yeah, and the Grim Reaper tells him, hey, the dead belong to me, you should kill the living instead.
So the embodiment of death tells this guy that he should kill people, and he just goes along with that.
He does.
Well, okay then.
So Francesco, he just goes on a little bit of a killing spree.
And the killing is what makes him feel better?
No, not really, but then he meets another woman who looks exactly like the widow he fell in love with earlier in the movie.
Oh, a doppelganger. That's interesting. I wonder what it means.
Unclear, but he immediately falls in love with her.
Great.
But there's a problem, you see. She's afraid of sex.
Oh, no.
Right, so then he goes to see the doctor to get castrated.
What?
Oh, don't worry, the doctor actually isn't willing to do it, so he just injects a chemical directly into Francesco's penis that will make him impotent for about a month.
Well, I hope after all that he at least gets to be with the girl.
Actually, she ends up getting sexually assaulted by her employer, so she just falls in love with him instead.
Wait. So let me get this straight. You wrote a character who was afraid of sex, so you had her fall in love with someone who sexually assaulted her.
Oh, was that in poor taste?
It was.
Whoops.
Whoopsie. So what happens after that?
Well, Francesco actually ends up meeting a third woman who also looks exactly like the widow, but he finds out that she's a prostitute, so he just decides to burn her frickin' house down.
Oh, so he's just full crazy now.
Well, sort of. He murders a couple people at the hospital, but then he decides he doesn't actually like killing anymore, so him and Nagi decide to leave town.
And how does that go?
Well, actually, everything's going rather smoothly until Francesco finds out that the road ends at a cliff.
So how does he do with that?
Well, he then decides that the world is fake, so he's just gonna kill himself and Nagi.
Oh no.
Oh yeah, but then he decides not to.
Oh.
So then Nagi throws the gun over the cliff, says his first words, and asks to go home.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yep. And then we find out that the world's a snow globe.
What?
And that's the end. What do you think?
Well, it sounds like a really intriguing movie. You know, it plays around with a lot of interesting ideas. You got a little bit of romance, a little bit of action, a little bit of scares. I feel like this is going to be something that people love for years to come.
Well, thank you so much, sir. And who knows, maybe if this movie gets popular enough, they'll show it in school classes one day.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but I definitely think we have a success in our hands here. I will admit, I'm still a little iffy on the title, though.
Well, what do you think it should be called, sir?
Well, it's about a man who works in a cemetery, so let's call it Cemetery Man.
I don't know, sir. Don't you want a title that better emphasizes the film's themes of love and death?
No. Cemetery Man works.
Oh, well, I guess I don't have a choice then.
You don't. So let's get to making this thing. But before you leave, does anything feel familiar about all of this?
Well, what do you mean?
I don't know. It just feels like when you were pitching me that movie, you were ripping off a format from somebody else.
Who could I possibly be ripping off right now?
Hi everyone, I'm Ben, your underground conductor, and welcome to Underground Cinema. What you just saw was a Ryan George-style pitch meeting that I did a few years ago for the movie DellaMorte Dellamore, aka Cemetery Man. Now that pitch meeting was actually one of the final projects that I did for college, and the version you just saw was actually the version that I originally turned in. I have not altered it at all, despite the fact that I was very tempted to. I still have all the footage. I could easily do a re-edit of that if I wanted to. But me doing that really wouldn't be authentic. Like, I know my editing skills have improved over time, but for better or worse, that's the job I did on that pitch meeting, and I'm proud of it. Plus, I've always wanted an excuse to post at that pitch meeting anyway, and since this is the 30th anniversary of DellaMorte Dellamore, and since I have my own movie review channel now, perfect opportunity. So me putting it up isn't just a gift to you guys, it's also a gift to myself, because I finally get to show off something that I am proud that I put together. I swear, it has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that I've become actually incredibly intimidated by the editing process for my videos, and me including the pitch meeting helps pad out the video. I swear. Now, DellaMorte Dellamore, which I actually have here on stunning 4K, is one of my favorite zombie films. I would put it up there with George Romero's Dawn of the Dead from '78, as well as Edgar Wright's Shaun of the Dead. Genuinely, I think this movie's great. Not only is it one of my favorite zombie movies, it's probably my favorite Italian film. I just feel like this film is so interesting. With that all in mind, though, you probably should take what I just said with a grain of salt. I know I'm gonna piss off a lot of movie buffs by saying this, but I'm not particularly a fan of Italian cinema, and I also am of the opinion that most zombie movies are okay to bad. Like, seriously, Bicycle Thieves, overrated movie. Zombieland, also overrated movie. Fight me. And to piss off even more movie buffs on top of that, let's talk about 4K. Now, to be clear, I do not regret picking up this 4K of DellaMorte Dellamore. I actually picked this up for a very reasonable price, and I picked it up brand new. It was completely sealed. I didn't open it until I actually started planning to rewatch the film to make this review. And it comes with a lot of great features. It comes with the director's commentary, cast and crew interviews. I think there's even a CD that's included with this. Oh yeah, here it is. CD. Soundtrack CD. However, the simple fact of the matter is that this movie should never have been put on 4K. Most movies should not be put on 4K, because most movies were not shot on 4K, nor were they originally shown in 4K. Most movies were not meant to be seen in a high definition. They just weren't. Oftentimes, when you do a restoration of a movie and try to increase the visual quality of it, you end up making the movie look worse. Like, this movie came out in 1994, as far as I can tell, there's no CGI in it. However, the movie does feature a lot of good practical effects, because it is a zombie film. Sometimes you see a zombie's head exploding. However, when you see it in the higher definition, you could clearly tell what's a prosthetic and what's not. And it really takes you out of the experience when you're all like, oh no, they Yeah, that doesn't look good. Another example I can think of, and this really pulled me out of the movie, is that there's a sequence in the movie where you see a bunch of wisps floating around, like Will-o'-the-Wisps from Brave. And that's not just me calling them that. Francesco in the film calls them Ignis Fatuus, which translates to Will-o'-the-Wisp. And you can tell in the film that they were just little balls that were set on fire and they're floating on strings. And because of the higher definition, you can see the strings in the film. It's very distracting. All in all, it just makes the film look cheaper. There's a reason why I only own like 3 4Ks, and I mainly have them just for the special features. Typically, they don't make the movie look better. They don't. They make the movie look cheaper. It really astonishes me that so many people are just obsessed with 4K now. Like, movies were not meant to be seen like this. Like, I would argue that Blu-rays have the exact same problem. And I'm not necessarily against Blu-rays, I own a lot of Blu-rays. But I am of the opinion that DVD is the best format to watch films. There's a reason why my physical media collection consists mostly of DVDs. And it's true that there's a certain nostalgic element to DVD for me, because I grew up during the transition from VHS to DVD. But I think visually, for most movies, DVD has the sweet spot where it's clear enough for you to appreciate the visual style of the film, but not so crystal clear that it ruins the illusion of the filmmaking, if that makes sense. Anyway, moving on to the film itself. Obviously, with my pitch meeting, you guys already know what the plot of the film is. I'm not going to recap that for you, but instead, what I will talk about is all the amazing things I noticed on this rewatch. I was actually very excited to rewatch DellaMorte Dellamore, and watching it again, there's just so many elements of it that I find so incredibly interesting. Like, I always have this question in my head, like, will I end up rambling during the review and just talk about this thing I found interesting and this thing I found interesting, rather than actually getting into the nitty-gritty of the film? And I'm genuinely afraid that I'll do that here, because there's just so many interesting things about this movie. So many concepts you can dig your teeth into. Ideas that go beyond all of the zombies and the sex. It's just so incredibly intriguing. And on a rewatch, there's just so many things that I picked up on that helped me appreciate the film even more. And getting to the very ambiguous ending of the film, my mind is already swirling around with theories about what everything meant. Like, it's truly one of the few films that I have a very difficult time wrapping my head around. And I figured out The Shining. That being said, not everything about the film held up for me on a rewatch. I have a more critical brain now, and there was one element of the film that I thought definitely did not hold up. I already talked about how I thought the visual quality of the film was kind of ruined by the higher definition. That's not the movie's fault. That's 4K's fault. But something I did notice on my rewatch that did disappoint me is that a lot of the performances from the side characters and extras are bad. And to be fair, if your character isn't part of the central focus of the film, you don't necessarily need to be giving an Oscar-worthy performance. But one of the performances in the film really could not be ignored because of just how central the character is. So, the main love interest in the film, who is a nameless character, it's part of the mystique about her, she's played by the actress Anna Falke. And unfortunately, her performance in the film really sticks out like a sore thumb. It's not great. Turns out Anna Falke was actually a model, which makes sense, the woman is gorgeous. But her acting does leave something to be desired. Like, I don't want to be mean about this, I don't want to be overly critical, but most of her lines, it sounds like she's just reading them straight off the script. And I know that that's basically me throwing a stone in a glass house, since I just showed you a pitch meeting that I made a few years ago, and it's very clear in that I was just reading off a script, but it really sounds like that in this. And nothing's wrong with, like, her facial performance, or even her physical performance for that matter. It's just the line reads. And judging on the cast interview, I think it's probably safe to say that English isn't her first language, so I really can't be too critical of the performance, but still, it sticks out. Although part of me actually wonders if her dialogue was actually dubbed, because hearing her voice in the interview, granted the interview was done years later, it doesn't sound like her. I don't know. Point is, it's definitely something that stuck out on the rewatch, and it kind of disappointed me. And it's even more disappointing when you consider that her character in this movie doesn't have a lot of agency. Granted, she is not the central focus, Francesco is the central focus, but her presence in the story is very significant, and for a lot of this movie, she just feels like an object of desire. And to be fair, that that's kind of the point. Like, her presence in the story is supposed to sort of highlight the immature nature of Francesco's character, but still, it's unfortunate. Like, seriously, just give Anna Falke a little bit of agency. I mean, for God's sake, I made a joke in my pitch meeting about women loving dead things. Like, in the movie, she actually gets turned on by the idea of going to an ossuary, which is literally just a mausoleum full of skulls and skeletons. Like, I know that certain people do have death fetishes, but seriously? Really? Then again, this was an Italian production, so lack of female agency. What can you do? I mean, you already know what the mayor did with her character later in this story, so... it's kind of rough. Moving on from that, though, there are some pretty great performances in this movie. A performance that I did not recognize at all, I had to look it up, was Derek Jacobi. He voices the Grim Reaper in this movie. And I actually found that kind of funny because, Derek Jacobi, he played Professor Yana in Doctor Who, the alter ego of the Master. Yeah, and, just putting the dots together in my head, one of the early iterations of the Master in, old Doctor Who was, a skeleton guy in a hood. So it's just kind of funny that this actor who played the Grim Reaper in this movie, 15 years later, played a version of the Master in Doctor Who, who for a time was a Grim Reaper character. Just little things here and there. There's also an amazing performance from Francois Haji Lazaro, who plays Nagi. Lazaro himself, apart from his role in this film, is probably best known for his role in City of Lost Children. I actually noticed so much about Nagi's character rewatching this movie. At first glance, he just seems to be a simpleton character, but there's a lot of nuance to him. There's a scene in the movie where he's putting back together, this skull, and then he quickly takes it apart again when Francesco walks in. And then Francesco comments about how Nagi shouldn't bother trying to put it together because Francesco can't even put it together. It's a very hard thing to do. And Nagi did it in, 30 seconds. Nagi can also play the violin beautifully, so, it makes you wonder, is it a front? Is Nagi just pretending to be stupid? Is Nagi a genius, or is he just some sort of savant, and it's only certain things that he's really good at? Because he is a character who's clearly smarter than he's letting on. And that goes into something else at the end of the film that I want to talk about. But moving on from Lazaro, Rupert Everett is spectacular in this movie. In the States, Rupert Everett is probably best known for playing Prince Charming in the Shrek movies and playing Dr. Claw in Inspector Gadget. But when it comes to defining roles, he knocked it out of the park with Cemetery Man. He's perfect for the role of Francesco Dellamorte. And he's not just perfect in terms of his performance, he's also perfect visually. Turns out DellaMorte Dellamore was actually adapted from two different source materials. The first was a book of the same name written by Tiziano Sclavi, but the second was a comic strip that was also written by Sclavi called Dylan Dog. And the main character of that comic strip, visually, was designed to look like Rupert Everett. Rupert Everett was just always fated to play this character. It's sort of like how when they redrew Nick Fury for the Marvel Ultimates universe in 2001, they drew him to look like Samuel L. Jackson because they were hoping that Samuel L. Jackson would play him in a movie later. It just kind of worked out that way. It's funny because there is that old saying of how art imitates life and life imitates art. Really, no other person could have played this character, even though they did try again with Brandon Routh. But moving on to Francesco's character. Watching the film again, it's so interesting seeing how the film is essentially a character study on Francesco, and how all the zombie stuff really just kind of fades into the background in the second half of the film as we sort of recenter our focus on Francesco. There's something I really love about this film, and you see this a lot in a lot of book adaptations, is just a lot of the visual symbolism. There's a lot of amazing shots in this film. You see this one shot of wings behind Francesco. There's an amazing symmetrical shot with a pool reflection of the moon, and right in front of it is a sculpture of the earth. Even the opening shot of the film is spectacular. It's just a camera panning out from the inside of the skull that Nagi put together later in the film. Completely practical shot. Apparently, the director, Michele Soavi, was able to get that specific shot of the skull using a special camera lens called an Inavision lens, and he thought it'd be fitting to open the film from the inside of a skull because it would tie into one of the central themes of death. Starting the film from inside of a skull, inside death, before introducing us to the main character, would help reinforce that idea. And then you get into the character of Francesco himself. And it's so interesting seeing how lonely this guy is. His only two friends would be Nagi, who only says one word, "yeah," which honestly just makes me think of American Dad. and this city employee named Franco. He doesn't talk to anyone else. And he's also just very clearly depressed. Like, he works in a cemetery, he works around dead things all day, and he feels like he's fated to do that because his name is literally Francesco Dellamorte, Francis of Death. And I think Rupert Everett perfectly embodies that sort of depressed nature about the character. There's a real melancholy to Everett's performance. He's just such a jaded character, and seeing the way he disposes of zombies, just shooting them without any hesitation, doesn't even faze him. It just shows how disillusioned he is with the world. He treats every element of his life so casually, including killing the zombies, but the thing he takes so seriously is love. The guy's basically a hopeless romantic, which is why he immediately falls for Anna Falke's character, because he has this, like, twisted idea of what love is. And it's clear that it's something that's really deeply present in his character. I mean, he mentions this in the film. While his name is DellaMorte, his mother's maiden name was Dellamore, which means of love. So he's always carried this idea of love with him. And then when he loses it, he starts to unravel. Like I said, this film really makes me think, and I still haven't figured it out. But my working theory about this movie is that after Francesco loses a woman that he's fallen in love with, he just kind of snaps. Because we see in this movie that the first time he's introduced to the Grim Reaper is after two very significant events. The first event is when he kills a living person consciously for the first time. It's this young girl who's in love with a zombie named Claudio. He shoots her by mistake when he's killing Claudio. And it's when Anna Falke's character actually resurrects. Because when she resurrects, he realizes that when he shot her initially, that she wasn't actually dead. That he killed her by mistake. And then the next day, Nagi comes about and he throws some of the old phone books that they don't need anymore into a fire. And Francesco gets mad. And the reason that's significant is because Francesco loves phone books. Like, reading phone books is apparently one of his favorite pastimes. Just shows how kind of odd he is. But death materializes from that. And my theory about the movie is that the trauma of killing a living person and accidentally killing the woman that he loved is what makes him spiral. Because afterwards he goes on a killing spree that he only remembers doing as a dream. And despite the fact that he starts doing more and more murders, he starts to notice that less and less people are paying attention to him. And he's getting upset about that. It's very similar to, like, Patrick Bateman at the end of American Psycho, where Patrick is, like, confused about why no one believes him that he's killing people. Like, I know it's a cop-out, but I think that a lot of what's going on in Francesco's world is just going on in his head. And I think that's foreshadowed in the scene where he sees his friend Franco, and he's mad at Franco because Franco took credit for Francesco's murders. And when Francesco starts grilling Franco over these murders he's taking credit for, Franco just says that he doesn't recognize Francesco, which reinforces the idea that everything that we're seeing is just going on in Francesco's head. And when the shot pans out, you see this void around Franco's hospital bed, and that sort of harkens back to a conversation they had on the phone, where Francesco is saying that maybe the rest of the world doesn't exist. And then you get to the end of the film, where he drives out to the cliff, and yeah, the rest of the world doesn't exist. You know, it zooms out, we see that the world is a snow globe, and they actually foreshadowed that at the very beginning of the film, when you see the same snow globe, and you see Nagi and Francesco standing at the cliff. It's just so incredibly weird and interesting, and I really can't make heads or tails of it. That's why I really love this film. It's more than just zombies and sex. There's so many ideas that you can play around with. There's even a scene in this movie that I still haven't fully wrapped my head around, where Francesco is talking to a statue of death, and he is saying that he and death are the same, that they kill out of indifference and love, but never out of hate. And he's saying at this point he has no idea what the difference between life and death really is, and that he's going to leave. And then death says, "Where will you go if you do not yet know the difference between life and me?" And it's just such a philosophical question, and I just don't get it. I just don't. And it's amazing. And like I said, Francesco's character is so incredibly interesting, because he seems to be like a passé blah character who's above it all, but he's also incredibly egotistical at the same time. Like, he really cares about the way people think about him. Like, there's a rumor floating around the town that the cemetery's in, Buffalora, and the rumor is that Francesco's impotent. Turns out Francesco himself is the one who actually spread that rumor. And when he meets the first duplicate of Anna Falke, and Anna Falke says that she's afraid of sex, he immediately lies and claims that he's a eunuch. And then he goes to get castrated to double down on the lie. Good thing the doctor didn't go through with it, because obviously that didn't work out. But he's just such an odd character, and he's so hung up emotionally on so many things. He's pretty much the ultimate simp, when you think about it. Like, move aside Mordecai from regular show, Francesco Dellamorte has you beat. And once again, when you get to the end of the film, and Nagi says his first words, asking to go home, Francesco replies, "Nia," which is what Nagi always said up until that point. So it's like, it makes you wonder, was Nagi always the smart one and was Francesco always the dumb one? Who knows? I mean, maybe Nagi started talking again because of the head trauma that he'd suffered like 5 minutes earlier. And Francesco also pretends to be smarter than he is. Like when he first meets Anna Falke's character, he lies and says that he has a biology degree, when in reality he dropped out of grade school. And there's so many instances throughout this movie where it's very clear that if he just thought about something a little bit, he could figure out why things are the way they are. Like, at the beginning of the movie, he says he doesn't understand why people come back from the dead. And to be fair, it could be a lot of reasons, but maybe it's because at the top of the cemetery entrance, it literally has the word resurrection carved out in Latin, and he just doesn't notice that. Like, I really wish I could speak more coherently about this movie, but there's just so much to pick apart about it. I genuinely love this film. You know, it's so funny. I love this movie so much that I even have a button of Francesco right here on my little horror movie jacket. I would highly recommend it to anyone who just likes high-concept horror movies. And if you aren't interested in all the cerebral nonsense and all the themes of love and death, you know, there is a bunch of great zombie kills in the movie too, so maybe that'll do it for you. But yeah, I love DellaMorte Dellamore. I love everything about it. I love the character of Francesco. I love Nagi. I love the fact that Francesco keeps seeing the same woman over and over again, and that's probably because he's crazy. I love the zombie kills. I love the fact that there's a scene in this movie where a zombie drives out of the ground on a motorcycle. I love Valentina's character. Valentina is the disembodied head that Nagi falls in love with. She's great. She's a fun character. I love the fact that the mayor in this movie is like the mayor from Jaws, and he's only concerned about being re-elected. And you know what? Even though the 4K made it look cheaper, didn't ruin the movie for me. Like, everything about this movie is great. And if you guys don't believe me that this movie is good, apparently Martin Scorsese himself said that DellaMorte Dellamore was one of the best Italian films that came out in the 90s. And we all know that Scorsese is the end-all be-all when it comes to things that are and are not cinema. Sorry, I didn't make the rules. I didn't. So yeah, that was my review of DellaMorte Dellamore, aka Cemetery Man. Please feel free to subscribe if you're feeling generous. You can follow me on Instagram or Letterboxd if you want to hear more of my film takes. And I will see you later.